Hello and welcome. The City of Los Angeles and LA Sanitation and Environment, or LASAN, are happy that you've joined us for our presentation on our draft program Environmental Impact Report for the Comprehensive Plastics Reduction Program. You may also hear me or my colleague, Dr. Lindsey Garner, refer to it as the Plastics Program. We're giving this presentation as part of our work under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. You may have attended our scoping meeting last May. Since then, we have been working on the environmental analyses. Today, we will again explain the program and summarize for you the results of the environmental analyses. We also want to hear from you. We very much encourage you to provide written comments. My name is Christine Batikian. I'm an environmental supervisor within LASAN, and I've been leading LASAN's efforts to conduct an environmental analysis following the CEQA guidelines for this proposed comprehensive plastics reduction program. For those of you that are interested in receiving this presentation in Spanish, we have a pre-recorded presentation that can be found at the website link found at the bottom of this slide. Para aquellos que estén interesados en recibir esta presentación en español, tenemos una presentación pregrabada que se puede encontrar en la página web que se encuentra en la sección de abajo de esta presentación. I'd like to give you an outline of our presentation. I'll first describe the purpose of the presentation and provide an overview of the plastics program. Dr. Lindsey Garner will then describe for you the environmental analyses we have conducted in the draft program environmental impact report. She will also let you know the schedule, including times when we will be seeking your input. I'll then close by describing how you can provide comments on the draft program environmental impact report that we will be summarizing today. We are very interested to hear any of your thoughts, but the most useful to us are comments on our environmental analyses provided in the document. Let me tell you about this presentation and the Comprehensive Plastics Reduction Program. One very important part of the CEQA process is to provide opportunity for any interested person or organization to have input in the process. But first, you need to know about the Comprehensive Plastics Reduction Program and the potential environmental impacts analyzed in the draft program Environmental Impact Report, or PEIR. That's what this presentation is all about. I'll tell you about the program, and Lindsey will tell you about the technical analyses. Now, we're ready to get into the proposed Comprehensive Plastics Reduction Program itself. First, I'll provide a brief overview of solid waste management within the City of Los Angeles. LA Sanitation and Environment, LASAN, provides solid resources collection services to the entire City of Los Angeles. LASAN services 750,000 households, comprising 530,000 single-family homes and 220,000 multifamily units, those ranging from duplexes to 4-unit buildings. The 6 recyclable service providers, which are franchised by the city, handle about 65,000 accounts for medium and large multifamily complexes, those that are larger than 4 units, condominiums, and commercial and industrial businesses. Here's a little bit more about LASAN and what we refer to in the PEIR as downstream facilities. We are responsible for many environmental services, and in the case of the plastics program, we handle what you put in your bins. LASAN is central to making Los Angeles a zero-waste city by diverting materials away from our limited landfill capacity and instead directing them to recycling, reuse, or composting. We also consider the solids you put in your bins as a solid resource. As a reminder, the blue bin is for recyclables, the green bin is for organics, including food-soiled paper products, the black bin, which we are trying to minimize, is for refuse, and you may have seen a brown bin, which is for horse manure. We also have several specialized solid resources services, including collection of bulky items, holiday trees, electronic waste, and household hazardous waste. Please do use these specialized services because they handle waste streams that can be toxic, or so unwieldy they are just littered. With LASAN's commitment to zero waste, we are taking further action to pursue opportunities to reduce the use of non-reusable and non-recyclable items and plastic waste in the city. Around the world and in Los Angeles, plastic waste is a real problem. For plastics, especially for single-use plastics that are essentially made to be thrown out, I do use the word waste and not the word resource. Well, why is that? Well, because although theoretically you can recycle plastics, in practice it is very difficult, energy intensive, and less than 10% of the world's plastic is actually recycled. As a result, it is frequently littered where millions of tons of plastics flow into rivers and streams to the ocean, where it accumulates and enters the ocean's food chains. Globally, there are over 6 billion metric tons of plastics in the environment, and that number is rising quickly. In 2020, UCLA's Luskin Center studied the plastics problem here at home in Los Angeles. In addition to being the primary source of land litter and runoff to the Pacific Ocean, in LA, the plastics litter affects tourism, recreation, and the aesthetics of our great city. Plastics also have human health and ecological toxicity effects, both through directly entering our food and indirectly through their presence everywhere. The UCLA study also emphasized that in LA, most single-use plastics cannot be recycled. In part, this is because residual food on single-use plastic foodware like plates, forks, and spoons renders them unrecyclable. So, both from a global and local perspective, it is clear to us that we cannot continue on this path of single-use plastics. Throughout the last decade, the city has demonstrated its commitment to zero waste by implementing various ordinances related to reducing plastic waste at its source. To date, the LA City Council has adopted the following 6 ordinances with measures to eliminate single-use plastic carryout bags at various stores and shops, to eliminate expanded polystyrene products, also commonly known as styrofoam, to provide plastic straws and single-use foodware accessories only upon customer request, and to transform all city facilities and sponsored events to zero waste. Now, the city is considering a more comprehensive approach to the plastics problem. This more comprehensive approach, or the plastics program, is what we are talking about today. With this proposed program, the city would like to create a comprehensive citywide strategy to reduce plastic waste and reduce the environmental and human health impacts of single-use plastics. The city needs to articulate this vision so that individual program elements can be enacted in a way that is mutually supportive and efficient. Without a vision, it's possible to get off track. The main focus of the plastics program is on single-use items made to be thrown away. We are not focused on plastic in durable goods like your car, your home, or things intended for multiple uses. The proposed plastics program would be implemented throughout the city, which is shown in the gray shading on this map. The city's proposed program can only be implemented and enforced within the city limits. The comprehensive plastics reduction program that we are considering and have prepared the draft PEIR for consists of 2 major parts, upstream and downstream. This is illustrated in the graphic on the right. Upstream refers to the measures focused on keeping plastics out of the city in the first place. Upstream measures focus on banning or restricting certain plastics. For example, our citywide ban on expanded polystyrene that went into effect for large establishments in April 2023 and will take full effect for all businesses on April 23rd of this year. Or banning or restricting certain types of items. For example, our disposable foodware accessories on request ordinance, which focused on single-use plastic foodware accessories. Upstream measures encourage either the use of alternate materials or the use of more durable items that can be reused multiple times. An example of this was our ban on single-use plastic carryout bags, which led to the use of more durable cloth bags that can be reused multiple times. In contrast to the upstream measures, the downstream measures shaded in green on the graphic focus on how the city would manage the change from plastic materials to alternate materials. Downstream measures may include changes to how solids are collected from you, how materials may be effectively reused, recycled, or composted, and how those solid resources are handled from when you are done with them and place them in a bin to LASAN's handling processes and locations. At this stage of the plastics program, we are not sure how the downstream ecosystem would change. However, we do have a solid foundation for predicting the types of facilities that are likely to be needed and the likely size and environmental impact of these facilities. This is what we analyzed. And for both upstream and downstream measures, communication with you is a key part to this program being successful and achieving its objectives. As a result, the program includes public outreach and education, as well as further studies and further work which could identify other upstream or downstream measures. We do want to be clear that the comprehensive plastics reduction program could continue to grow, and additional CEQA review may need to be done. So what exactly are we considering? What are the upstream restrictions and the potential changes to downstream handling? Over 20 upstream measures have been analyzed within the Draft Program Environmental Impact Report. These upstream measures fall into 5 subcategories: foodware, plastic bottles, textiles, and other products as shown on this slide. Each measure is independent of one another, and I'll walk through each subcategory in the following slides. Before doing so, it is important to note that no specific city ordinances or policies have been drafted or proposed at this time. Therefore, each upstream measure of the plastics program has been crafted in a way to allow us to analyze the environmental effects of potential future city ordinances using conservative but reasonable assumptions regarding potential future city actions. The program itself and the environmental analyses contained in the Draft PEIR are intended to provide LA City Council with the information necessary upon which to base future decisions and actions. Let's start with the foodware measures analyzed in the Draft PEIR. Many single-use foodware items are not easily collected and recovered for recycling due to size, material, and food residue, resulting in the majority going to landfills. In order to address single-use plastic pollution and divert plastics from landfills, we have evaluated measures that would limit single-use foodware or those foodware items that are not accepted for recycling or composting within the city. Specifically, we evaluated measures that would require reusable foodware for dine-in services and require all single-use to-go foodware to be sold or provided to be either recyclable or compostable within the city, or reusable. With bioplastic products being neither recyclable nor compostable in the City of Los Angeles's Solid Resources Management programs, we evaluated a measure to prohibit single-use foodware and food contact products made partially or wholly from bioplastics. Additionally, we evaluated the prohibition of single-use plastic coffee or beverage pods and meal kits with non-recyclable components unless the manufacturers or providers take responsibility for these items with a take-back or recycling program. Let's move on to measures addressing plastic bottles. In the Draft PEIR, we evaluated measures that would prohibit single-use plastic water bottles, as well as measures that would encourage single-use plastic reduction by requiring supermarkets and grocery stores to establish refill convenience zones, where customers could fill reusable bottles and jugs with home care, personal care, or food products. To complement these measures, we have evaluated measures that would require plastic bottles and jugs used as packaging for beverages, food, personal care products, and home care products sold in stores to be refillable. We also evaluated a leashed lid requirement for single-use plastic bottles. What that means is that the cap stays attached to the bottle when you uncap it for drinking. Next, we have measures addressing textiles. Today, most textiles are made of plastic fibers that over time contribute to microplastics entering our environment and even into our bodies through the food chain. Through the Draft PEIR, we evaluated two types of textile measures. The first would prohibit manufacturers, retailers, distributors, warehouses, and fulfillment centers from disposing of unused, unsold, returned, or excess apparel and textiles as trash. The second would require laundry machine manufacturers to make new washers equipped with microfiber filtration systems. The microfiber filtration systems would also extend to existing washing machines in commercial or residential settings. Lastly, we have the other product subcategory, which includes specific and unique measures that don't fit under the other three upstream subcategories, but have adverse environmental impacts. First, we evaluated within the Draft PEIR the prohibition of plastic bag clips. You typically see these on bread bags. These squares of plastic are not recyclable due to size and end up in landfills. There are compostable or filter-based alternatives, fiber-based alternatives to it. Next is a ban on items containing PFAS or fluorinated chemicals that are commonly referred to as forever chemicals. They are ubiquitous in our environment and have adverse impacts on human health. The next two measures that were evaluated prohibit silly string and single-use printer cartridges. Single-use printer cartridges cannot be recycled or remanufactured for reuse, so they contribute to thousands of tons of plastics cartridges entering landfills. The ban on single-use printer cartridges was an addition that came from public input during the scoping period. We also evaluated bans on plastic sandbags and lighter-than-air balloons. Plastic sandbags can contribute microplastics to waterways as they tatter over time. Similarly, balloons negatively impact wildlife when they are released into the environment inflated or when they burst and all the fragments are scattered in the environment. Lastly, under the other products subcategory, we evaluated a ban on single-use e-cigarettes and their associated single-use cartridges. This also came about from public input during the scoping period. Now, when you think about the upstream measures, there are consequences downstream. For example, with fewer single-use plastic bottles, not only does that mean a move towards reusable water bottles, it also means a move to more bottle refilling stations. Also, with a change in the types of material that LASAN collects, there will probably be a need for new or expanded solid resources handling facilities. These facilities would address changes in the amounts of compostable, recyclable, and refuse material. In addition, with the reduction or elimination of plastic foodware, you can expect to see more foodware and linen washing facilities. As a result, within the Draft PEIR, we evaluated the development or expansion of green bin, blue bin, and black bin facilities, as well as hydration stations and foodware and linen washing facilities. LASAN recently studied the likely increase and change in downstream facilities. Although the study was not specifically for this PEIR, it provides a wealth of information and analysis that we use to develop the projection of the likely downstream measures, which are identified in this slide. Also, we don't have specific locations identified for these sites. The PEIR addresses the impacts to expect from construction and operation of these sites. The PEIR therefore provides a foundational piece for future environmental review once specific locations are considered. Okay, so that's the Comprehensive Plastics Reduction Program. We are now going to turn to the other major topic for this presentation, the Draft Program Environmental Impact Report, in which LASAN has analyzed the potential environmental impacts of the program I just described. For that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Lindsey Garner.
Thanks, Christine, and hello again, everyone. I'm Dr. Lindsey Garner with Catalyst Environmental Solutions, and I've been supporting LASAN with their CEQA review for the plastics-related ordinances since 2021. I'm the Deputy Project Manager at Catalyst for the Plastics Program CEQA Environmental Review, and I have been a part of the core team working on this comprehensive program since 2022 to clearly describe the elements that are being considered and to analyze the environmental effects of these elements. I will spend the next few minutes providing an overview of the CEQA process in general and our analysis of the proposed program. The California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, is an environmental law adopted by the state legislature in 1970 for the protection of environmental resources. CEQA applies to all state and local agencies that have discretionary approval for a project or program. It requires local and state government and resource agencies to evaluate the potential impacts of a proposed project or program to a wide spectrum of environmental resource areas. The agency, in this case the City of Los Angeles, presents their environmental analyses in a CEQA document, such as the Program Environmental Impact Report, or PEIR, that we have prepared for this program, and identifies feasible mitigation measures to reduce or avoid significant adverse impacts. An EIR is meant to inform the public and decision makers of any potentially significant environmental impacts of a proposed project to ensure that those decision makers have considered the potential impacts of the project on the environment when they approve a project and issue permits. An EIR is not an approval, and it is not a permit. It is a decision support tool for all parties, and in particular the city or other public agencies that must make discretionary approval and permit decisions. The CEQA process involves the opportunity for public participation. The public participation for this program began with the Notice of Preparation, or NOP, issued on May 1st, 2023, announcing that the city intended to prepare a PEIR for the plastics program. The next opportunity for public comment is the period that we are in now, which began on March 12th when the city released a notice of completion and availability for the draft PEIR. Christine will provide information at the end of this presentation where all documents for the program and CEQA process can be found. The draft PEIR analyzes the potential impacts of the comprehensive plastics reduction program on the 20 environmental resource areas shown on this slide, including air quality, biological resources, greenhouse gas emissions, and water resources. Certain resource areas, such as air quality and noise, have numerical significance thresholds set by regulatory agencies. For other resources that are more qualitative or are entirely dependent on the immediate setting, a discrete quantitative threshold is generally not feasible, and the substantial adverse change in physical conditions is applied as the significance criterion. Examples of these qualitative areas include aesthetics or biological resources. Due to the diversity of measures proposed under the plastics program, as well as their potential environmental impacts, we have analyzed the upstream and downstream measures separately, and we also analyzed each upstream measure individually. Because no specific ordinances or regulations have been drafted for upstream measures, nor specific sites proposed for downstream measures, we use conservative yet reasonable assumptions in our analyses. For upstream measures that propose to ban a certain single-use plastic material or product type, we also analyze the potential impacts of alternative materials. While we analyzed each upstream measure individually and provided an impact determination for each measure in the draft PEIR, I will provide a summary of the impacts for the upstream measures on the following slides, and then I will discuss the findings for the downstream measures. But before we get into the environmental findings, I'd like to go over some CEQA terminology. The draft PEIR considers 5 levels of significance for potential effects. A beneficial impact means that the program would result in an overall improvement to the existing baseline condition. No impact means the program would not have any measurable impact on the environment. A less than significant impact means the program may have the potential for affecting the environment, but these impacts would be below levels or thresholds that the city or other responsible agencies consider to be significant. If an impact is determined to be potentially significant, LASAN identified mitigation measures which are intended to reduce the intensity of the impact to the extent feasible and are included as conditions of the project approval. As such, a less than significant impact with mitigation means the program may have the potential to cause a significant impact on the environment, but the level of impact would be reduced to less than significant levels with the implementation of these mitigation measures. Finally, a significant and unavoidable impact means the program may result in environmental impacts that are significant and cannot be reduced to levels that are less than significant, even with the implementation of mitigation measures. So first, we'll start with a discussion of the program's upstream measures. Because the upstream measures do not involve any construction or ground disturbing activities, there would be no impacts to the various environmental resource areas that are impacted by such activities. These resource areas include agriculture and forestry, cultural resources, geology and soils, land use and planning, mineral resources, population and housing, public services, recreation, tribal cultural resources, and wildfire. The direct effects of upstream program elements are largely due to the removal or reduction of a certain program component, such as single-use plastic water bottles, while indirect effects are driven by the market and users' responses to the removal of these products through adoption of alternative materials, replacement behavior, or new practices, such as through the use of reusable water bottles, resulting in water use for washing of these bottles. The program's upstream measures would have less than significant impacts on aesthetics, air quality, biological resources, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, noise, transportation, and utilities and service systems. Many of the individual upstream program elements would result in a reduction of single-use plastics that would be replaced by recyclable, compostable, or reusable materials and products. Therefore, many of the individual upstream program measures would reduce the adverse effects caused by plastic litter and pollution and would have beneficial impacts on aesthetics, biological resources, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, and utilities and service systems. Downstream program measures include the potential for construction of new or expanded facilities. As we've mentioned previously, the specific locations for new or expanded facilities are not known at this time. Therefore, the construction of a future facility would be subject to a site-specific review when it is proposed. In the draft PEIR, we evaluated the potential impacts of downstream facilities at the program level by identifying the number, type, and size of downstream facilities that are reasonably foreseeable outcomes of the program. We also used bounding level assumptions that facilities would be built in commercial, industrial, or public facility lands zoned for their use. These are things we can quantify and analyze now. For the impacts that are specific to a particular site, those would be addressed once a location is identified. But our analysis in this document evaluates impacts at locations that are most sensitive to change. This approach bounds the level of impact that we present in the draft PEIR. The ground disturbing activity and physical changes to the environment for construction and operation of new or modified facilities drive the direct impacts of these elements of the program. The indirect impacts of downstream program elements are driven by the reasonably foreseeable responses of the area to a facility. The downstream measures that would have no impact are population and housing or recreation, and downstream measures would have less than significant impacts on energy, greenhouse gas emissions, land use and planning, mineral resources, and public services. The draft PEIR identifies that downstream measures could have potentially significant impacts on numerous resource areas that could be reduced to a less than significant level with the incorporation of mitigation measures, which are also described in the draft PEIR. These resource areas include aesthetics, agriculture and forestry resources, air quality, geology and soils, hydrology and water quality, and utilities and service systems. Mitigation measures include such elements as the requirement to conduct a water supply assessment to determine if the water needs of a downstream facility would exceed the projected water supply, and then requiring redesign of the facility so as not to exceed the water supply or relocating to an area with a sufficient water supply. Due to site-specific conditions of future facilities and the potential proximity to sensitive resources and receptors, downstream facilities could have potentially significant and unavoidable impacts on biological resources, cultural and tribal cultural resources, hazards and hazardous materials, noise, transportation, and wildfire. Mitigation measures identified in the draft PEIR must still be applied, but because there is uncertainty regarding the location of future downstream facilities, it is unknown at this time if mitigation measures would be feasible or effective to reduce impacts to less than significant levels. Therefore, we have identified certain impacts for downstream facilities as potentially significant and unavoidable. For these resources, most locations that may be selected are unlikely to have significant impacts, but because some could have significant effects, we identify them as such in the draft PEIR. For example, the draft PEIR identifies numerous mitigation measures for noise, including a project-specific noise study, limiting construction hours, providing temporary barriers near sensitive receptors, and ensuring that construction equipment is adequately maintained and muffled. However, despite these measures, construction noise impacts may still exceed the noise significance threshold depending on the construction equipment used and distance to sensitive receptors. In addition to the analysis of the potential impacts of the proposed program, the draft PEIR also evaluates the potential impacts of two alternatives, the no program alternative and an extended producer responsibility alternative. The no program alternative means that the city would not implement any upstream measures to reduce the distribution, offer, provision, and sale of single-use plastic products in the city. The city also would not expand its capacity to recycle, compost, and reuse alternative materials via downstream measures. Under the no program alternative, none of the benefits of the program would occur, such as benefits to aesthetics and water quality, and the existing problems caused by single-use plastics that Christine described earlier would continue in the city. None of the potentially significant impacts of the downstream elements of the proposed program would occur under the no program alternative. As Christine described earlier, some of the upstream measures of the proposed program include extended producer responsibility or take-back programs. Under the extended producer responsibility alternative, products that would be banned under the proposed program would instead be required to have extended producer responsibility programs. These products include single-use plastic water bottles, single-use plastic beverage holder rings, plastic bag clips, and single-use e-cigarettes and vape cartridges. The success of the extended producer responsibility programs is dependent on the nature of producer programs and effective consumer participation. Although this alternative would have some of the benefits of the program because products would be taken back and recycled and reused by producers rather than landfilled in the city, these single-use plastics would still be manufactured, distributed, and sold, and could potentially end up as plastic pollution, resulting in adverse impacts on the environment. The draft PEIR also evaluates the cumulative impacts of the proposed program in conjunction with other past, existing, or planned projects or programs within the City of LA and surrounding areas. The focus of the cumulative impact analysis is to identify the potential impacts of the program that might not be significant when considered alone, but that might contribute to a significant impact when viewed in conjunction with these other projects. As we did for the proposed program itself, we evaluated the program's cumulative upstream and cumulative downstream measures separately. For upstream measures, we looked at the cumulative effect of the program in conjunction with state and regional plastic reduction measures. None of the upstream measures would result in a significant cumulative impact. For the downstream measures, we analyzed the cumulative effects by using growth projections of different local and regional agencies, in addition to the potential effects of the program. The downstream measures could have a cumulatively considerable impact on biological resources, cultural and tribal cultural resources, hazards and hazardous materials, noise, transportation, and wildfire. Now that we've provided a summary of the draft PEIR findings, I'd like to turn back to the CEQA process and opportunity for public input. This slide summarizes the CEQA process for the proposed program. As I mentioned earlier, the first step of the CEQA process was the publication of the NOP on May 1st, 2023. This started the 30-day public scoping period during which the city sought comments from the public on the scope and content of the PEIR, and we held a series of scoping meetings in May. The second step is the publication of the Notice of Availability on March 12th, indicating that the draft PEIR is available for public review. This public comment period that we are in now lasts until April 26th, and it is your opportunity to provide feedback on the analyses in the draft PEIR. After this comment period ends, the city will review all comments received and prepare responses to each comment. The city will also revise the draft PEIR as necessary to provide the clarification needed based on the comments received. LASAN will then present the final PEIR to the LA City Council, who will vote whether or not to certify the PEIR. You will have the opportunity to provide your input again at this time. This entire CEQA process is scheduled to finish in the fall of 2024. Once again, certification of the PEIR does not mean any program elements will be implemented, but that CEQA analysis has been conducted and certified for potential future ordinances or city actions. I'll now pass it back to Christine.
Thank you, Lindsey. As we've been discussing, now is your opportunity to provide your input on the draft PEIR. Let me tell you how to do it. There are numerous ways for you to review the draft PEIR. There are hard copies of the draft PEIR at the City of Los Angeles Public Works Building, as well as 15 city libraries shown here. The draft PEIR is also available electronically on LASAN's website, shown here on the slide. We have 3 ways for you to provide us with your inputs and comments. Choose the one that works best for you. I like the first one. This is a link to a form that walks you through the comment process. You can type in your relevant information and your comment, and you're done. You can also access the form by scanning the QR code on this slide. We also accept mail. This is the address to mail us your comment and input. Email is also easy. You can send your comment and input directly to LASAN at san_sourcereduction@lacity.org. If you provide an email comment, please put in the subject line, Comprehensive Plastics Reduction Draft PEIR. Also, please put your name and physical address in the body of the email. These 2 things make sure your email doesn't get lost and that we can send you updates on the plastics program. Program materials and this information on how to provide comments are also available on the LASAN website. So take your pick. We are accepting comments until 5 p.m. on April 26th. Thank you very much for joining Lindsey and me today. This is an important program for the city, and we need your input and your participation now and in the future. Thank you again.